Oh, why hello there, and welcome to Frank Reads. I'm Frank Hasemuller, and I've been reading some of my favorite stories lately, and I thought I'd share them with you. I enjoy them, and I hope you will too. Now, if you saw my two-part video series of Marie de France's Lavnal, you'll remember that at the end of part 2, the camera kind of messed up, and since I'm always kind of at the mercy of my camera, I figured I'd go ahead and use that take, but I also thought I would maybe make another video kind of to supplement those two, and to talk about the thing that I was in the middle of talking about before the camera messed up. So I was talking about Celtic mythology and how it influenced medieval Arthurian legends. Now remember, Marie lived in the mid to late 12th century, which was long after, centuries after, the Celtic world had become Christianized. The first people to encounter the Celts were the ancient Romans, and this was some over 1,000 years before Marie de France's time, so it was over 2,000 years ago. And the Celts used to live through most of Europe, but eventually over time they kind of got pushed further and further north until they were only, to this day, we tend to think of them as being like Irish and Scottish, and maybe a little Welsh and English. But actually, they used to be in most of Western Europe. And their mythology is very interesting. It's very entertaining. It's very much worth studying. And you can't really study it without eventually reaching King Arthur. The earliest Arthur tales come from, I think, the 10th century. I could be wrong about that. But a lot of people, a lot of scholars tend to agree that King Arthur may have been a real person. We'll never really know for sure, but he also could have been originally a Celtic hero or even a Celtic deity. And that after the Celtic world became Christian, they kind of took all of their gods and just kind of, instead of making them, gods, they became heroes and knights and kings, or just lesser supernatural creatures like fairies. Because when we think of fairies, we tend to think of like insect-sized humans with bug wings, and that's really more of a modern invention. Medieval fairies were the size of humans, and they were much more human than we think of. And in fact, like, medieval fairies are closer to like the elves in J.R.R. Tolkien's work. And Tolkien himself was very much influenced by Celtic mythology. And the Celts, they had recurring images like magical cauldrons were an important image in Celtic mythology. And a lot of scholars think that the magic cauldron of the Celts ended up becoming the Holy Grail of Arthurian legend, because it isn't really until the Christian and the Celtic worlds meet that the Holy Grail even becomes an important thing. Like, I don't think it's even mentioned in the Bible. Like, people just kind of assumed that Jesus had it at the Last Supper, and then they ended up spinning this whole legendarium about it. And so Lavnal kind of deals with the whole Celtic mythology thing, like the lady who's actually, interestingly enough, she's never named, but she's obviously supernatural. She's wealthier than any king on earth who ever lived. And she also kind of comes and goes as she pleases, and she's invisible to other people, and she tells Lavnal that if he speaks of her, then she'd disappear and never see him again. But then eventually she ends up breaking her own promise at the end, and they do live happily ever after in Avalon. And Avalon is another image from Arthurian legend, which is a mystical place, and it's where eventually Arthur is taken after his death, even though he does promise to return when England needs him most. Because Avalon kind of ties into this Celtic idea that there is the human world, but then there is also this supernatural other world, and that the two worlds exist essentially as, like, to use like a sci-fi term, they exist as like parallel dimensions. And sometimes they can cross over each other, and the supernatural creatures from the other world can cross over into the human world, and humans can cross over into the other world. And there are certain dates, such as the solstice, where the wall between the human and the other worlds are very weak, and it's the easiest for them to cross over. And one of those days is called Samhain. Samhain was a very important Celtic holiday, and today we know it as Halloween. So, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Celtic influence on Arthurian legends and on the work of Marie de France. It was very interesting just because she was a woman, and there weren't a whole lot of women writers in the 12th century. But, like I mentioned in my Lavnal videos, there's very little known about her, and I really wish we knew more, because she wrote very good stories, and they have a lot of psychological depth, and they're more sophisticated than most people would assume, because, medieval people were not unsophisticated. So anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching my videos. I hope you will join me for my next Frank Reads video. So until then, keep reading.